Good day. My name is Terry Difazio, and you're watching Dial It Up on NEK-TV. My guest today is David Kennedy from the Vermont Guardian Ad Litem program. It's a pleasure to meet you, David.
Nice to meet you, Terry.
Can you tell us a bit about what the Guardian Ad Litem program is and how it's used?
Sure. The Vermont Guardian Ad Litem program runs through the state's judiciary, and it consists of 270 volunteers who act as guardians ad litem primarily in abuse and neglect cases.
Okay, so you primarily deal with abuse and neglect as
Correct.
opposed to just plain divorce cases.
Correct. Guardians ad litem can be assigned in a lot of different areas in Vermont.
Okay.
The ones primarily our responsibility is in abuse and neglect cases, which are called CHINS cases in Vermont.
Okay, can you explain what CHINS are?
Sure. If there's an allegation of abuse or neglect,
Oh, okay.
or sometimes a child is seen as unmanageable, which is another form of CHINS, or truancy. Those all fall under what's called a CHINS docket.
Okay.
And each of those cases, a child would be assigned an attorney and a guardian ad litem.
Okay. Can you briefly explain to our viewers what exactly is the role of a guardian ad litem?
Sure. As I said, in abuse and neglect cases and CHINS in general, their singular responsibility is to determine the best interest of the child.
Mm-hmm.
So
that is the idea, isn't it?
Correct. Well, that's their job.
Yeah.
I mean, ideally, it's the courts and the process's job as well.
Right.
But other parties who participate in that process have other considerations they have to follow.
Right.
The guardians ad litem don't investigate whether or not something actually happened. They don't make a determination of whether there was or was not abuse or neglect. Their only job is to make sure that the child who they're responsible for is advocated for throughout the process.
Oh,
And
okay. All right.
that's their job.
Okay. And can guardians ad litem initiate court actions or not?
No, not directly. They are not attorneys in the sense that they are not assigned. An attorney could volunteer as a guardian ad litem,
Mm-hmm.
but that person's role would be as a guardian, not as an attorney. So the guardian ad litem generally works with the child's attorney, and the child's attorney can make motions, but for the most part, the guardian ad litem does his or her work between hearings, so that there shouldn't really be a need in most cases for the guardian to initiate a legal proceeding between hearings.
Okay. And can they be appointed for children like in foster care?
Yeah. So when there's an allegation of abuse or neglect, DCF investigates every single allegation that's made.
All right.
I do not work for DCF, so I may get some of these things technically incorrect. Most things that DCF investigates, most allegations do not result in a child being taken into custody at all. If there is found to be, at least preliminarily, evidence of abuse or neglect,
Mm-hmm.
DCF can initiate what's called an emergency care order.
Okay. Can you explain that one? That sounds quite fascinating.
Sure. So when there's a phone call into DCF, and I'm, again, speaking on behalf of an agency that I don't work for, so this could be wrong. There's a few things that could happen. One could be there's no substance of the call that's made. So
Okay.
you don't like the way I raised my son, you call DCF because you don't think he should be allowed to listen to heavy metal music.
Now that should be thrown out immediately.
Right. Well, and it would be, right? I mean, DCF would be like, there's no merits for this. There's not a child at risk of harm, so nothing. It could be that they find that it's a family who needs support,
Right.
so they don't
Okay.
initiate a process with the courts at all. They just provide services for that family. Or they could find enough evidence of abuse or neglect, they initiate a CHINS procedure. And the first step of that would be the emergency care order. And that would be when the determination is made about DCF has to present enough information to show that there, at that point in time, there's more likely than not a child who may be abused or neglected.
Okay, so your agency, how do I put this, interlaces services with DCF?
Sort of, yeah. So at that point, the emergency care order
Right.
is when the child would be assigned an attorney, when they would be assigned a guardian ad litem, and then the next step would be what's called a temporary care order, and that's where the child's going to be placed as the case moves forward. So just because there's an allegation of abuse or neglect, the child could be in foster care, or the child could be placed back home or with a relative under what's called a conditional care order,
Right.
custody order, sorry. So what guardians ad litem do is try to determine what's necessary for that child's best interest, both short term, so are there services that child needs, are there any deficiencies that need to be met, if a child hasn't received medical attention, are there needs to get that child some medical attention now as opposed to waiting till the process is done. DCF's doing a similar investigation.
Okay.
And so a lot of times DCF social workers and the guardians ad litem will be at the same meetings, talk to the same people, potentially share information at what are called team meetings. And so there's a lot of parallel work that's done, but guardians ad litem do not work for DCF, and DCF does not work for my program.
Yeah, and I think you just raised something that I wanted to investigate a little further
Sure.
with you is, you said the guardian ad litem doesn't actually investigate. For example, did this person do this?
Correct.
Whereas DCF would have to do that, wouldn't they?
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure of the scope. So because a CHINS process is a hearing, so
Right.
there's a judge goes in front of the court. There's different stages. So I mentioned the emergency care, there's temporary care, and then there's what's called merits. And merits is the question of whether or not something happened.
Oh, okay. All right. Now I understand. Yeah.
The child will have an attorney, the parents will have an attorney, and then there'll be a state's attorney, but DCF technically does not have an attorney. So
Okay.
DCF presents findings of information that the attorneys for the various parties then use to either prove or attempt to disprove that abuse and neglect happened.
Oh, okay.
And at that point, if a child is found to be in need of supervision, which is what CHIN stands for, that's when the case moves from that to sort of figuring out what the end result, what permanency will be for that child. So where's that child going to wind up at the end of this whole entire process?
So you could have, technically, you could have several state agencies involved in this, or a few at least.
For sure. If a parent's assigned an attorney, that's generally through the public defender's office or through attorneys who work with the defender's general's office. There's the state's attorney who represents the interest of the state in these proceedings. DCF is a state agency. Guardians ad litem are part of a state agency. We don't all answer to the same person, so there's not. So everyone has their roles and their responsibilities,
Right.
and they can conflict with each other. So I said that DCF and Guardians ad litem might get some of the same information, but their conclusions with that information could be very different. And then, like I said, the child's attorney and the parent's attorney are most likely going to have different positions than the state's attorney would.
Right.
So,
Has it ever been your experience to see a guardian ad litem get removed or fired from a particular case just because somebody doesn't like somebody?
no.
Or if there happens to be some sort of misconduct, for example?
Right. So this is a tricky situation because by definition, these are emotionally charged proceedings.
Yes. Yes.
And there's a lot of people involved in it who, a parent who's being accused of something, whether or not the allegation is true or not true, that parent is not necessarily going to be all that happy with people who are asking it questions that they may not want answered. It's very personal to have a child and very personal to be a parent. And
Yes.
so just because a parent does not like a guardian ad litem, that's not grounds for somebody being removed. It does have to reach the level of misconduct. And misconduct, would have to be pretty significant to have a guardian ad litem removed. Because remember, the guardian ad litem's responsibility is for the child in this case, not for the parents.
Right.
So what the guardian ad litem would have to be doing would have to be something that would be interfering with his or her ability to advocate for that child. Mm-hmm. And so let's say a parent did think that there was misconduct, that parent would have to go to their attorney, who would then need to make a motion in court to have the guardian ad litem removed and replaced. I don't know of any, I wouldn't necessarily know if this happened, because there's so many cases that I wouldn't necessarily be notified. But to my knowledge, it hasn't happened, at least in the 6 months or so that I've been doing this.
Okay. And how many people work under you, David?
Well, there's two groups of people who work. There's 5 coordinators who are part-time folks who support the guardians ad litem in different counties. And then there's 270 or so guardians ad litem who are all volunteers from across the state.
Yes, and as I've been told, these are not paid positions, are they?
No, not at all.
Okay.
These are people who volunteer their time, often substantial amounts of time. You're probably aware that the child protection process is in a crisis. DCF has 2 to 3 times the cases that they ideally would have.
I've heard about that, but can you expand on that? Because I have heard about it, but
sure.
I'm not that familiar with it, as say as you would be, but I've heard about it.
Yeah, no, of course, and I think that what we've seen is with an increase in the opiate epidemic in Vermont,
yes,
specifically heroin, but also, pain medication,
prescription stuff too. Yes,
yeah, correct. You're seeing an increase in the number of abuse and neglect cases as parents become addicted and make decisions based on their addiction rather than on their volition, if you will. And so what you're seeing is a drastic increase in the number of cases that are moving forward into the court system. So DCF has cases beyond the court system. So their situation, I don't fully understand the scope of it, but I can tell you how bad it is for guardians ad litem. And then if you expand that well beyond, that gives you a sense of DCF. And so the best practice for guardians ad litem is to have no more than 2 cases or 4 children that they're responsible for.
Okay.
We have 270 guardians ad litem who have between 2,000 and 2,100 kids, which works out to about 8 children per guardian ad litem. So that's more than twice what we're supposed to be having.
Okay.
And the only reason that works is because the amount of effort that the coordinators and the guardians ad litem are putting in above and beyond what's reasonable to expect of them, especially the volunteers.
Yeah, I was going to ask you how many people are guardian ad litems and how many people are responsible for, but you already answered that question.
Yeah.
So
no, and I mean, so there's 2 ways of addressing this issue. One is you get more people working on the problem, so more guardians ad litem, which we desperately need. The second one is to reduce the number of cases, and in a substantial way, not just by not taking them, but by addressing the issues that lead to cases. And I have no control over the latter, so I'm just working on the former for right now. And try to give as much support I can for the people doing the work.
Yeah, we've heard a lot about this shooting case, the DCF.
In Barrie,
and
yeah.
I'm wondering if the shortage of people and the overload of cases is somewhat contributing to some of this problem. Just a rhetorical question.
Which problem?
Too many cases and too few workers.
Yeah, so the shooting is beyond horrible, and I think the impacts that you're seeing of that from that moment forward, I think we're still seeing people not even, I would say recovering, but I don't even know if they're at the recovery stage yet. More just dealing with the impact of that and their grief with that. I think that I'm amazed at how consistently good the work being done by these people, from the judges who have too many cases, to the clerks, to DCF social workers, to their managers and supervisors and the GALs, considering all of this. And I think what you saw with the shooting is a strained system having a traumatic and extreme situation, and the impact of that on an already strained system, I think we're still trying to make sense of right now.
Yeah, I think you touched upon something here, and I won't go off on a tangent because I could, but it's absolutely astounding how the drug and alcohol problem really exacerbates all of these other problems.
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
And that's the tragedy of it, and it's too bad. But you've touched upon that, and so in your opinion, this new opiate problem, and we're not just talking about heroin, we're talking about even prescription drugs, because I could go into a whole hour's worth on that, and probably afterwards I will tell you a little bit about this too. You can see how this has. There's sort of like a snowball effect, isn't it?
Right. Well, you know, I think, yes, 100%. I think what you have is you have parents who get, without opiates and drugs, so take those out of the picture,
right,
get caught up in their own lives. And we all know that life can be challenging and life can throw us unexpected curves. And I think there's some who need help. And I think sometimes when those opiates aren't, or alcohol or whatever is not involved, that the services that are provided for them oftentimes can sort of help them through that hump.
Yes.
I think what you're seeing with opiates in the nature of addiction is that the need for services to get a person to the point where they will both not be doing their drug of current choice,
right,
and be able to provide a level of care that a child needs. And that's like yeoman's job. I mean, that's a lot of work to happen, that not just for DCF and other service providers like alcohol and other drug counselors and treatment centers and mental health facilities, but also for the parents themselves. That's a lot to ask of individuals. And so I think there's some who see DCF's involvement as a wake-up call, and hopefully there's a lot of them who are getting help they need because it's gone that far. And then I think you see other people who aren't ready to make the changes they need to make. And to think that the court system is going to fix that, I think is a mistake, because court addresses when something goes wrong. It doesn't.
It doesn't address when something goes right.
Right. Well, I mean, it wouldn't know about it, right? So
Yeah.
if there's a reduction in the number of cases because fewer people are addicted to opiates, you're not going to see, the court can't claim responsibility for that.
No.
Just as it can't claim blame for when there's more people on opiates. And
Of course not.
I think you're seeing similar things with DCF, where you're getting, we tend to want to find somebody we can hold accountable for societal problems. And I think that there's a lot of people who are unfairly blamed, and I think DCF's one of them for responding. And if you read the criticism of DCF, they're contrary criticism. So DCF does X, DCF also does Y. And I think that that's where you're seeing our state really respond and try to struggle with what's a real societal problem right now.
Now you've told us you've been doing this for about 6 months.
Yeah, I've been doing this job in Vermont for about 6 months.
Now, you did this job somewhere else before?
No, I did program management issues around in higher education and around sexual assault issues, mediation, those sort of conflict resolution.
Where did you do that, David?
In Boston. I worked at MIT and I had a consulting company after that. So
one of those schools, huh? One of those second-rate, not off-the-grid schools.
Yeah, I'm a state school guy. I just worked there.
Oh,
so,
okay.
no, it was great because I think it allowed you to see systems holistically. A lot was what was required of those other jobs, and that's why I'm here. And I'm an attorney by education.
Okay.
So I haven't practiced in a long time, but I went to law school and practiced for a while.
Okay, so what's your level of education?
Law degree.
So you basically, what do they call that? A JD?
Yeah, it's a JD. So I have a JD, which is 3 years after college.
And where did you get that degree?
George Washington University in D.C. And so I practiced about 3 years, and then I went into higher education after that.
Okay. And did you find education more rewarding for you?
No.
No.
More rewarding. Do you mean working in higher education?
Yeah.
No. This has been. So I worked with Nobel Prize winners. I worked with the former Secretary of the Air Force under Clinton.
Oh, wow.
Some of the best minds in the country and in any country really at MIT. And I have never been as impressed as I am with the people who volunteer and what they bring into the position and the passion and the compassion that they show, as well as the judges and attorneys who I've been able to meet and work with in this area. And the social workers have been, there's a level of selflessness and a level of expertise that I think has been very humbling for me doing this job.
So you've obviously dealt with a lot of attorneys, or not? Or is that
starting to. The guardians, I let them deal with attorneys more on a regular basis. I tend to deal with the offices from which attorneys come. So I worked with the Defender General's office and the folks who run the juvenile side of things over there.
Okay.
And some contact with the Attorney General's office and other areas like that.
So when it comes to tougher cases, you don't directly deal with those, do you?
I don't. I don't do individual casework.
Okay.
So I will not be assigned a child in a CHINS process. Generally, there's two things that'll happen. A guardian ad litem will need a thinking partner, and they might go to another guardian ad litem, or they might go to one of the coordinators that I mentioned, who only really have at most about 8 hours in any one county that they can provide. In Lamoille County and in Orleans, I'm doing my best to offer that because we don't have a coordinator in those counties.
Oh, okay.
So I'll get some questions trying to figure out just next steps. And then where there are coordinators, I'll often, when I get sort of brought into a particular case, it'll be because things have gone, what are already horrible cases, like every fact pattern, every story is, you don't want to happen to your child, right?
Right, yeah.
Or to you if you're a parent. But the ones that I get involved with are the ones that tend to be either more horrible or more logistically complex.
Well, it would stand to reason because you said that you deal mostly with abuse and neglect cases, so
Correct. Therefore
they would probably be the rougher ones, the more nasty ones, right?
Yeah, and in guardians ad litem, the way the Vermont statutes work, they can be assigned in other types of cases as well. And those tend to be where the parent who would normally be the guardian for whatever reason cannot be the guardian. So a delinquency case where a child commits an infraction or allegedly commits an infraction and the parent's either a witness or the victim. So yeah, my son uses my credit card to buy things without my permission and then gets caught. I can't act as his parent in these cases because I'm technically the victim.
Right.
So the guardian could be there, some domestic cases in rare occasions, but even then, for the most part, the people that I help train and supervise work on abuse and neglect cases.
Do the people, the guardian ad litems themselves, do they ever express extreme frustration over anything specific? Is there anything that really kind of says, you know, boy, this is making things tougher?
Yeah, well, I think that what you're seeing, I think everybody who works in the system gets frustrated, not because of the people working in the system necessarily, but because, I mean, we're vastly underfunded. So I said there's coordinator help in most counties that's 8 hours a week. It should probably be at least 20 hours a week.
Yeah.
The amount of training we're able to offer, we do a pretty thorough pre-service. So before anyone could even try to become a guardian ad litem, they do 32 hours of training. Then they have a mentoring program they go through. And then after that, we don't really have funding to do the types of training that we would like to be doing. So, I mean, what is the effect of opiate addiction? How does it affect the brain? I mean, some of these questions which I would love to be able to provide a more detailed training on, we just don't have the funding to do. And so I think between the caseload and so the need for volunteers and then the need for support for those volunteers, both in terms of personnel and additional funding, I think that you see that frustration passed down. And for me, the problem with that is it leads to people sometimes getting so frustrated that they feel like their efforts could be better spent elsewhere. And every time I lose a guardian ad litem, there's a tremendous impact for that. And I think you see the same thing with DCF and with the other parties to these cases where what you're trying to do is the best you can with what you have, and what you have isn't enough. And then just human nature, at some point in time, you realize that you could probably do something that doesn't have that level of frustration. So try and do what we can to help out the guardians that we have and make improvements the way we can.
Yeah, now over the, maybe this isn't a fair question for you, but over the years, have you seen there be more or less people that want to be involved with this?
So I've only been doing this for 6 months, so
Right.
I'm just looking at numbers, not people,
Right.
which is always tricky.
Yeah.
Our numbers have been in about the same range, but the cases have gone up exponentially.
Oh, okay.
So if you look at 8 years ago, we were about the same numbers of guardians ad litem, but the cases have, I don't want to say doubled, but close. And so the people, our numbers need to increase correspondingly, hopefully.
Right.
And that's one of the things we're working on as well, is just trying to get more people to volunteer, the more people who volunteer, the fewer cases each one has. Hopefully the less that frustration you asked about comes into play and that sort of thing. So
Yeah, because obviously you can burn some people out.
correct.
And I know that probably happens in DCF too.
I'm sure.
Or in any agency, you can just overload people so much, then finally the system just breaks, or the person breaks, or whatever.
Yeah, and the people who are doing the work, whether it's social workers, children attorneys who work on this docket, so work on the children, cases with children, or the GALs, at least, well, a large part of why they're choosing that over something else is dedication and commitment. Because attorneys can make more money doing other kinds of work.
Of course.
Social workers could be doing, less emotionally charged work and also making a big difference. And the guardians, again, could be spending their time doing pretty much anything they wanted to. And the fact that that we have that many people focusing on this, I think is should be a real source of pride for Vermont, I think.
In the people that you've seen that have wanted to be guardian ad litem's, do you see them from a cross-section of different professions, or are they more professional people or more blue-collar people, or
Right.
what is it?
I think that they come from all walks of life. Since I started, the Chief Justice, this is not because of me, this was arranged before I got here.
Okay.
But the Chief Justice, Chief Justice Reiber, has been visiting with each county's guardians ad litem and asking those very questions, like, what was your background, what brought you to this, and that sort of thing. And I think that you see a lot of retired teachers and social workers, but you see people from all walks of life, advertising people, business people, mechanics, former military. I think you see a lot of people who want to make a difference. And I think there's some people who may not try to be guardians ad litem because they think you either need to be an attorney or you need some level of familiarity, and that's just not accurate. What you really need is some time and compassion and the willingness to use that to help the most vulnerable citizens of Vermont and work with
And you
children
probably
who are
see a
there.
lot of different age groups of people that want to do this also?
I do. I think you see a lot of retirees just because of the nature of the time commitment and having to find time to come into court. But I think I'm seeing a good number, and hopefully we'll start getting more small business owners, people who have some flexibility in their schedule, and can schedule around things like hearings, for example. And you're seeing a lot more of that. And so I think the more people who hear about the program and understand the work that needs to be done, the broader that section will be, but it's already broader than I think one would think just thinking about it.
If somebody wanted to become a guardian ad litem, is there a website or a phone number or something where they could contact you or somebody in your department?
Absolutely. You can find us through the Vermont Judiciary, which I think I should have written this down.
I didn't realize I was going to ask it.
Yeah, no. So it's the Vermont Judiciary /GAL. Okay. I don't remember what their main website is, which is pretty embarrassing. But or you can just search Vermont Guardian ad litem, and that'll bring you to our page. But yeah, and that'll give you a website. There's an application there. You can contact your local court. So in here, you can contact the Orleans County Court, Family Court in Newport. Okay. And they can direct you the right way. Or you can just reach out to me. I'm david.kennedy@vermont.gov. Okay,
I will make sure I put that that graphic on, so that people can, if anybody wants to do this. And I think it's important that this happens. Do you have any advice you would give to a person who is thinking about doing this?
Yeah, we generally ask for a 2-year commitment because of the nature of the case. So it's pretty extensive training that goes on in the beginning, and then cases can take a while from start to finish. And to the best of our ability, we want to minimize the interruption of a child's life during that time.
Yes.
And it's about, for every child you have, 8 to 10 hours a month. And so if you're assigned one case with 3 kids, that could be a decent amount of time. But you also have the ability to control what cases you do and don't take. So come in there with questions. If you have a remote interest, get in touch with us, or we'll put you in touch with one of the coordinators, or we'll talk to you directly. And I think that it's something that a lot more people can do than I think they can do. And so if you have any interest at all, my recommendation is just to reach out and ask questions.
That sounds good.
We do a pretty thorough screening process, just so you know.
Oh,
so yeah, so we do a criminal background check, a state background check, abuse, like those sort of things as well. So nobody who gets through our program is going to be a known risk to kids especially, but people in general. So,
David, I want to thank you for coming on the show.
yeah, thank you, Terry.
It certainly, this is something that I think more people should understand and should know about. And I'm glad you took your time out to do this. And I want to thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate the time.
Maybe we will try this again.
All right, love it.
This is Terry Difazio for Dial It Up on NEK-TV, and saying thank you and have a good day. Catch you on the flip side.